We are on program number 3 of a 5-part series on the season of Advent, those days and weeks leading up to Christmas, to the celebration of the Nativity. What do you think of when you think about the days leading up to Christmas? We've already talked a little bit about the Orthodox practice of fasting and the opposite, which is the world's love of Christmas parties. But the other part of the days leading up to Christmas, I'm afraid at this point in my life, the thing I think about most when I think of the days leading up to Christmas has to do with gift buying. It's something that we all think about. It's something that really seems to fuel our economy in a manner of speaking. I've noticed that now over the past few years, every time I turn to the business section of the paper during the during December, there's something about retail sales, consumer confidence, and sales figures, and so on and so forth. Christmas gift giving is a very big deal. Now, there are a lot of ideas as to why it is that we give gifts during Christmas. Some people say that it relates to the wise men who came and visited the Christ child and brought gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and things like that. Some people talk about Saint Nicholas, who was a very generous man. He gave gifts of money to a father who had to sell his children into slavery because he couldn't afford to marry them off, and things like that. Okay, I'm not really sure about that, because in the early days of Christianity, there wasn't really the gift giving that we see today, and so consequently I'm not sure how it is that the wise men influenced the Christian world to start giving gifts, to go crazy with gift giving, to make themselves go even further into debt than they already are in order to impress people by giving big gifts. I'm also not sure about St. Nicholas, because St. Nicholas Day is December 6th and Christmas is December 25th. So how is it that gift giving came from that one day 19 days later to another day? But even if I was able to convince you that Christmas gift giving is a bad idea, that we shouldn't do it anymore, that it's historically not authentic, that it's too materialistic or something like that, even if I was able to convince you of all of those things, you wouldn't be able to stop giving Christmas gifts. And I wouldn't be able to stop giving Christmas gifts, because this whole thing is just too ingrained into our culture. One year, my wife and I decided that we wouldn't give Christmas gifts to any of our family members. At the time, we had just been married for a few years. We didn't have children yet. Of course, when you have children, the Christmas gift-giving thing takes on a whole life of its own. Sometimes it wakes you up in the middle of the night and eats you alive. But this was before we had children, and we decided, that all of the people in our family had everything that they needed. They have everything that they want. I mean, if a member of my family or a member of my wife's family, if they want something, they go out and buy it. I mean, they don't sit around wishing for Christmas to come or something like that. And so we thought, they're all adults. We can try something a little different this year. And so we donated money to charity in the name of whatever person we wanted to give a gift to. So the whole thought of it was, we thought that this was a good way to look at it. The whole thought of it was, what charity would be good for this particular person, or what charity would be good for that particular person? And we donated, I think, $100, which is far more than we would spend on a gift. We donated, I think, $100 to various charities. in the names of the people in my family and my wife's family. And then, you know, you get a card back from them. I don't know if you've ever done this. You get a card back that you fill out and say a gift has, or a donation has been made in your name to whatever organization it happens to be. And then we got those back, we put them in the envelope, wrote the person's name, and that's what we gave as a gift. Well, I want to tell you something. Christmas morning, everybody was disappointed. Everybody, you know, they weren't mad at us or anything like this. It wasn't like they threw temper tantrums, but it was obvious to me that even though these people had everything that they want, more things than they possibly want, I mean, when it comes to my parents and her parents, the house is too full. You can't put anything more in the house. If you buy them a gift that they have to put in the house, they have to take something that they already own and throw it away to make room. But still, these people, you know, our family members, they would open up the envelope and they would look in it and they would read it and they would go, oh, you donated money for me. Oh, that's very nice. And they put it down and wondered what was next. You know, it just wasn't what they wanted. So Christmas gift giving has become such an important thing to us, has become so ingrained. It's something that really, in a way, links us to our childhood. Because who is it that really is into Christmas gifts? It's children. Children are the ones. You say, you know, if it's November or December, you say to the child, if you want that, well, ask Santa Claus about it, you know, or if you want that, maybe you can get that for Christmas. Maybe you should put that on your Christmas list and things like that. And if you have children like my children, you get a list that's really, really long and really expensive until they get older. I'll have to say that as children get older, their list becomes a lot smaller, but a lot more expensive. You know, they'll ask for one thing, but the one thing, maybe $1,000 or something like that. Of course, something that's way too expensive to give them. But anyway, that's the way Christmas gift giving goes. How do we make that spiritual? How do we take this activity that occurs during Advent every year, is such an important part of Advent every year, how do we make that spiritual? Well, I have to say that to an extent, I don't think you can. I don't think you can. Because I don't think that Christmas gift giving is a spiritual activity, a religious activity, a church activity, a liturgical activity at all. And as a matter of fact, I'm not sure that you can take something that is a secular holiday, a secular activity, and sort of infuse it with a little bit of Christianity to make it spiritual. It's like going to the 4th of July and praying before you set off fireworks, or having a Jesus float in the parade or something like that. You know, you can kind of put a little bit of Jesus on the outside of it, but really the activity basically is a secular activity, and that's the way it goes. But we look at the prophets at this time of year. We're going to look at one of them today, one or two of them today. We look at the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, and what kind of thing would they say to us? What would they say to us about Christmas gift giving? Well, I think the prophets' message would be that we should enjoy the prosperity that we have been given. Because I think that the prophets would say to the people who have come before us, be frugal, be spiritual, be just, create a society where your children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and your generation for years to come will live in peace and prosperity. That's what we have now. We are enjoying the fruits of the generations that have come before us. I believe that the prophets would have said that to them, and indeed for most of us, we come from families that were very, were very attentive to this kind of thing. But now, what the prophets would say to us is, enjoy that, but remember. Enjoy that, but remember. World events change drastically. At any time, your prosperity can be taken away. Either your individual prosperity within a prosperous nation, or the whole nation's prosperity can be taken away like that through some kind of world event. Be prepared for that. Make this time a spiritual time of your life as best that you can. Enjoy gift giving now, but if gift giving is impossible next year, make sure that you have established that foundation of faith that will make the Nativity still a beautiful feast, even though gift giving might not be possible. So in our reflections today, we're going to look at a couple of the prophets. I want to start with Habakkuk, and then we'll go on to Zephaniah. And maybe if we'll have time, we'll look at St. Barbara, who's commemorated on December 4th. And I don't know if we'll have time, but if we do, either this program or next, we'll look at St. Nicholas, the saint of all saints when we come to this time of the year. First of all, Habakkuk. Habakkuk is a most unusual prophet. I think the book of Habakkuk is one that is the most easy to read of all the minor prophets, except maybe Jonah, because Jonah's like a story. But Habakkuk is very different in that, in his book, he asks questions of God. He doesn't just speak for God the way that most of the prophets do, but he asks questions of God, and then he replies to those questions in the voice of God. God speaks through him and tells us what those tells us what the answers are. So he's really expressing something of the longing of the people. The questions that the people have, he expresses. And many of those questions have to do with, how would you say it? Why do the wicked prosper? Why is there injustice in the world? Why does God allow suffering? And as Habakkuk asks that question again and again and again, the answer comes back again and again and again, that God is God. And he'll deal with the wicked in his own time, but you have to remember who it is that created you, who it is that created this universe, who it is that's God, and who is the person. And so when you are able to understand that relationship, the relationship that you have with God, then you are able to live properly, live in truth, live in relationship with God. Habakkuk is the one that makes the famous statement from the Old Testament, the just shall live by faith. The just shall live by faith. Now this particular verse, which is Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4, is reflected in the New Testament 3 different times, and reflected or echoed in the New Testament in very important ways. I mean, they're not just sort of on the side, but these are central points that in particular St. Paul wants to make in Romans, in Galatians, and in Hebrews. In all 3 cases, those words of Habakkuk, the just shall live by faith, are used to show that God is in control, and that those who are righteous, those who are close to Him, those people who are spiritual people, have faith in God's plan, have faith in God's control, have faith in the fact that God is God. This is a great lesson for us to remember during Advent. As we come to this time of the year, we rejoice in our prosperity, or we rejoice in our lack of prosperity. We rejoice in the joy that we have in our life, or we rejoice in the sorrow that we have in our life, because we understand that God is in control, that no matter what happens, He knows you, and He loves you, and He's watching out for you at all times. As Habakkuk says, the just shall live by faith. Now we come to another one of the minor prophets, another prophet that's celebrated during this holy season of Advent, and that's the prophet Zephaniah. Sometimes I think Zechariah, but it's not Zechariah. That's the father of St. John the Baptist. It's Zephaniah. Zephaniah prophesied about one particular thing that happened in the history of Israel. It was the Scythian attack on the Holy Land. Now these people, the Scythians, they are first mentioned in the 10th chapter of the book of Genesis. And there they are called the Ashkenaz. And they were a nomadic people, very skilled in warfare. They were descendants of Gomer. Now the name that we know, Scythians, that actually comes because the Persians took the word Ashkenaz and sort of made it into Shuska. Shuska was what they called them, and then the Greeks further corrupted that word from Shuska into Scythians. And so when you hear about Scythians in the later Old Testament, and once, as I'll talk about in the New Testament, they're talking about the same group of people that was spoken of way, way back in Genesis chapter 10. Antiquity remembers the Scythians as fierce, skilled, mounted archers. They were people who rode on horses and could shoot a bow and arrow. And so consequently, they were extremely formidable warriors. Even the Assyrians, at the height of their power, the Assyrian soldiers and Assyrian military leaders made it clear that they didn't want to fight the Scythians, that the Scythians were very formidable enemies. The Assyrian Empire, as a matter of fact, when the Scythians were on the move in the 7th or 8th century, I can't remember which one, I don't know if it matters, made peace with them, actually paid tribute to them and tried to get them on their side because they didn't want to fight these people. So, and as a matter of fact, later on in the book of Colossians chapter 3, St. Paul remembers these people as being particularly barbaric. He says barbarians and Scythians. He calls them the same thing. It's almost like their tribe has become a byword, because at the time of St. Paul, this is hundreds of years later, there were no more Scythians. They had been assimilated into other cultures. But what does Zephaniah say about the fact that the Scythians are coming to the Holy Land, that they are soon going to cause trouble there and take over? Well, Zephaniah specifically says that this is God's judgment, that this is God's wrath, that this is God's punishment. Well, as prophets go, there's nothing particularly special about that. But when it comes to Zephaniah, the reasons that he gives for God's judgment are unique. And in particular, God is judging the people because of religious syncretism, because of the mixing of religions. I want to read one part of his prophecy. This is in chapter 1 of Zephaniah. I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and I will cut off from this place the remnant of Baal and the name of the idolatrous priests. This is an important prophecy for us to remember, because what has happened in the Feast of the Nativity is that all sorts of mixing has gone on. You start with what is essentially a Christian holiday, a spiritual holy day, and you get what, you know, if you can hear my voice right now, you've been living in this culture long enough to know what Christmas is like. And it is not a Christian holiday. It is not a spiritual holiday. It has become something entirely different. As a matter of fact, one of my friends lives in a school system where they don't call, like the Christmas pageant in the school is not called the Christmas pageant, but it's called the Sparkle Season pageant. And, you know, Dave Barry talks about the fact that when he goes to the Christmas pageants, it seems like all the songs are about the weather. It seems like they go to the Church of Meteorology rather than making it a Christian holiday, which it initially was. What we see in our society then is this mingling of religions, this mingling of ideas, to the point where the real reason for this festival is completely lost. And Zephaniah has a lot to say to us about how God is angered by that, and how ultimately we will find ourselves punished by Him and abandoned by Him if we continue to mix things that shouldn't be mixed. Well, now I think we have a few more minutes, and we're going to look at the life of Saint Barbara. Saint Barbara is another one of the saints celebrated at this time. Saint Barbara is December 4th. Her feast day is celebrated. She's a very well-known saint, of course. Her name is popular and is used by many families to name their children. Saint Barbara was a very beautiful girl, and she lived in the 3rd century. She was the son of a very prosperous merchant who was a pagan. All right, and he was very protective of his daughter and so on and so forth. But she heard about Christianity, and she decided to become a Christian. Now, one of the things that her father did was to arrange a really good marriage for her. So he goes and he announces to her one day that he has picked out a wonderful husband for her, and she should be very happy. And of course, she said to him that she had become a Christian and that she wanted to devote her life to celibacy, to a life of virginity, to being perhaps a monastic, and did not want to be married. He became enraged, and he even tried to kill her immediately, but she ran out of the house and she escaped. Now, there are kind of two things about this time in St. Barbara's life when she escaped. One of them is the story about her going to to a mountainside as she was running from her father, and she went into the cleft of a mountain that closed behind her and hid her from him for a certain amount of time. The other story is that as she was running from her father, she put on a disguise, and she was able to hide from her father by putting on a disguise. And this is why in the Middle East, even to this day, people or children will dress in disguises on the Feast of St. Barbara on December 4th, and they'll go from door to door collecting candy. Isn't that an awful lot like Halloween? In fact, it's almost the same thing, children dressing up and going door to door to get candy. But the thing is that there's no ghoulish nature to this. They dress up in particular ways, but it doesn't have anything to being dead or having your limbs torn off or blood spurting out of your head or any of those other stupid things that that come up with Halloween here in the United States. And I had a woman in my parish who was from the Middle East, and she thought that St. Barbara's Day was celebrated on October 31st here. That's what somebody had told her, was, yeah, they have a day like St. Barbara's Day, but it's celebrated on October 31st. And so she had candy at her door, and people began to come to the door, but she was absolutely horrified. She called me up on the phone. She said, "What are they doing? They're not dressed up at all. They're covered in blood, and they look like ghosts, and their faces are painted white and things like that." Anyway, this is where the one of the ways that the feast of St. Barbara is celebrated in the Holy Land. Her father eventually found her and took her before the governing authority, and he interrogated her, tried to win her back to her pagan ways, but she refused. And ultimately, her father was the one who himself cut off her head with his own sword. Now, I mentioned this Feast of St. Barbara and this experience that this woman had at one of my at my former parish, when she opened up the door on Halloween to find little children dressed like ghouls and dressed like they were dead and things like that, in order to show that the way that ancient Christians celebrated their feasts has become so twisted in our culture. Not only Halloween, but also Christmas as well. And there's parallels that can be made between the celebration of the Feast of St. Barbara in the Middle East versus Halloween, and the celebration of Christmas in a Christian culture versus the celebration of Christmas in our culture. It's important for us to remember this. It's important for us to remember St. Barbara and to ask her to help us to celebrate the Nativity, the birth of Jesus Christ, in the way that is most pleasing to God. Well, I hope you can join us again next week on Tradition Today when we go to our fourth program of our 5-part series on the holy season of Advent.